If you have your Bible, we're going to be in John chapter 6 again. This is a pretty long chapter. We're going to be John 6 tonight. We're going to be in John 6 next week. We're going to finish out John 6, and then we got one more week in November. We'll probably be in John chapter 7. I figured I could, John's got 21 chapters, so maybe at some point I'll get to come back and we'll keep going through the book. So kind of like job security, right? All right, we're going to be in, we got a long section we're going to read tonight. We're going to read verses 30 all the way down to verse 50. And then we're going to break this up into three different sections to take a look at. But if you remember from the last couple of lessons, we talked about, 2 weeks ago, we talked about Jesus walking on the water and how he performed this miracle for his disciples. And the disciples' response was to immediately worship Jesus. They realized who he was. They knew him for who he was. And their response was to fall down and worship him. Then last week we looked at what the crowd's response to Jesus was. He had just done this amazing miracle for them. He had fed all of them. He'd given them, enough fish, enough bread, all this stuff. And their response was they wanted more. They just wanted at it. And so what we're going to pick up now is Jesus, after he has this interaction with the crowd, Jesus then goes on to preach kind of a sermon to them. And that's what we're going to look at, is Jesus' response to their desire for more food. So let's pick up. I'm excited. All right. Oh, no, what'd you do? That would have been bad. All right, here we go. Beginning in verse 30, it says this. They said therefore unto him, this is the crowd talking. They said therefore unto him, what sign showest thou then, that we may see and believe thee? What dost thou work? Our fathers did eat manna in the desert, as it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat. Then Jesus said unto them, verily, verily, I say unto you, Moses gave you not bread from heaven, but my Father giveth you the bread, giveth you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is he which cometh down from heaven, and giveth life unto the world. Then they said unto him, Lord, evermore give us this bread. And Jesus said unto them, I am the bread of life. He that cometh to me shall never hunger, and he that believeth on me shall never thirst. But I said unto you, that ye also have seen me, and believe not. All that the Father giveth me shall come to me, and him that cometh to me I will in no wise cast out. For I came down from heaven not to do mine own will, but the will of him that sent me. And this is the Father's will which hath sent me, that all of which he hath given me I should lose nothing, but should raise it up again at the last day. And this is the will of him that sent me, that every one which seeth the Son and believeth on him may have everlasting life, and I will raise him up at the last day. The Jews then murmured at him, because he said, I am the bread which came down from heaven. And they said, is not this Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? How is it then that he saith, I came down from heaven? Jesus therefore answered them and said unto them, Murmur not among yourselves. No man can come to me except the Father which hath sent me draw him, and I will raise him up at the last day. It is written in the prophets, and they shall be taught of God. Every man, therefore, that hath heard and hath learned of the Father cometh unto me. Not that any man hath seen the Father, save he which is of God. He hath seen the Father. Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that believeth on me hath everlasting life. I am the bread of life. Your fathers did eat manna in the wilderness, and are dead. This is the bread which cometh down from heaven, that a man may eat thereof, and not die. I am the living bread which shall... I went too far. That's for next week, so we'll stop there. All right. So Jesus went on and gave them this long discussion about, because they were asking for more food, and they said, well, you know what? We want you to give us another sign. Moses, you remember Moses, that guy? Jesus, I know you know who I'm talking about. He gave our fathers, he gave them manna. And so we want you to do the same thing. We want you to give manna. And so the first blank that I wrote down here, part one, is the contrast. Jesus is going to take their request, and he's going to compare the manna that they wanted with the actual true bread that he was. So our first blank there is, despite the miracles they had seen, the crowd was still demanding more. They had seen Jesus do all of these amazing things. And you got to figure, not only were they there when Jesus made the sandwiches, he gave them the fish and the bread, they had probably been, there were probably people in that crowd who had been around. There might have been some when he healed the man at the pool of Bethesda. We talked about that guy. The other miracles that Jesus did, there might have been some from the wedding when he turned the water into wine, that had seen all of these miracles. And yet every time they came to Jesus, they kept saying, Jesus, we want more. We want more. They weren't willing to believe that Jesus is who he said he was. They kept asking for more. They wanted more. They wanted their needs met, but they weren't willing to do what Jesus was asking of them. So it was obvious. The next blank there is, or the first blank is, despite the miracles they had seen, the crowd was still demanding more. The second one is, it was obvious the crowd wanted another meal because they brought up manna and Moses. So it was pretty obvious from the context that they were looking for Jesus to continue to meet their physical needs. Like that's why in verse 15 of this chapter, it was talking about they wanted to make him a king by force, because they figured if they put him in that position, if they forced him to do that, then he would owe them. They were like, Jesus, we put you where you are. You got there because of us, so you need to go ahead and give us another sandwich. Go ahead, let's keep making that fish. Let's keep making that bread. Jesus, keep meeting our needs because we put you in that position. And so that we can take from that context that that's what they wanted, because then they brought up manna. And what Jesus did was he took their idea of manna and he began to basically rebuke them, not in a stern way, not yelling at them and jumping all over them, but he went and he was upset with them because they did not understand the picture of what the manna was. Because the manna, in the Old Testament in Exodus, it was there to help the children of Israel. It was there to help them to survive, but it was also provided for a picture. And so Jesus went and he gave them 4 different ways in which he was better than the manna. The first one was, it was not Moses who gave them the manna, but God the Father. They thought that it was Moses that was providing them with the food, that it was Moses that was taking care of their needs. But in reality, Moses had nothing to do with it. Moses would go to bed just like everybody else, and in the morning, when he would wake up, the manna would be out there for them to gather. It wasn't like Moses was waiting for those of us that are parents, Christmas is coming up, and we have to wait for the kids to go to sleep. And then as soon as the kids go to sleep, we're sneaking around as quiet as can be. Because my children, well, Jack's okay. Jack will sleep through anything. But Sean, the slightest little noise, and he's out of bed. So Christmas time, we got to sneak around and quietly put the presents under the tree and do all that kind of stuff. It's not like Moses was, I hope nobody's around so I can put the manna out. That would have been a tough job. Maybe that's why Moses was tired all the time. He couldn't keep his arms up because he's out, planting the manna. But no, it was God the Father that supplied it, and that was the first thing that they misunderstood. The second one is, the manna was not the true bread, but Jesus was the true bread. And they misunderstood that. They thought that having that manna was going to meet their physical needs. Having that physical bread was what they needed. But in reality, they needed the spiritual bread that Jesus was. The third one is, the manna gave physical life. It met the physical needs of the children of Israel, but Jesus gives eternal life. And what we need to realize is that so many of us are focused on our physical needs and how we're going to take care of our physical needs, and how we're going to get the latest toys, and how we're going to pay our bills, and we're so caught up and focused on the things of earth. And it's important that we do that, because if we don't pay our bills, then they come and they take your stuff away. But we get so caught up in those things that we forget about the spiritual things. We forget that what's going to happen after this life is so much more important than what happens in this life. And so the manna gave physical life, but Jesus gives eternal life. And then this last part is extremely important. Manna was only for Israel, but the bread from heaven, Jesus, was for the whole world. When manna came down, it was supplied specifically for the children of Israel. But when Jesus came and began his ministry, even though he kind of talked a big game and he would tell people that I'm only here for the children of Israel, I'm only here for the children of Israel. If you notice some of the stories that we talked about, the woman at the well that we discussed, she wasn't from Israel. He came so that the whole world could have this bread. So that was the contrast. Jesus wanted them to understand that their belief about the manna was incorrect, and he provided them with a contrast to kind of move them in the right direction. The only problem was, and this takes us to part 2, is that the crowd, again, misunderstood. They thought Jesus was still continuing to talk about something that they could physically eat. And so, because of their confusion, because they didn't understand, verse 34 says this, then they said unto him, Lord, evermore give us this bread. They were still looking for him to supply their needs. And so Jesus, because he was, I don't want to say that he was frustrated, but potentially he was, getting a little perturbed with the fact that they just weren't getting it. They weren't getting it. Jesus says this in verse 35, I am the bread of life. Basically, he said, okay, guys, you're not getting it, so let me tell it to you like this. I'm the bread of life. Okay, stop asking me to give you bread forever, because I'm not going to do it. It's me that I'm talking about. And so because of their confusion, Jesus told them he was the bread of life. And he goes on to say, let me read through this passage here so you can get the verses exactly. He goes on, I'm going to pick up in verse 35. And Jesus said unto them, I am the bread of life. He that cometh to me shall never hunger, and he that believeth on me shall never thirst. But I said unto you that ye also have seen me, and believe not. All that the Father giveth me shall come to me, and him that cometh to me I will in no wise cast out. And we could keep going there. But the next set of blanks is, anyone who comes to Jesus will never hunger or thirst again. Now that doesn't necessarily mean you're never going to physically hunger again, or you're never going to physically thirst again. This morning I woke up and I was running a little bit late. My son Sean, the one I told you, wakes up at the drop of a hat. He heard me get up out of bed and go to the bathroom, so of course he was up and coming out to see what was going on. It was like 5:15 in the morning. So I had to get him back in bed. By the time I got him back in bed, Ethan was fussing, so I had to go in and rock Ethan and get him all taken care of. And then I had to get in the shower, and as you may have noticed if you got a little close, I didn't get a chance to shave this morning. I was running late. And so by the time it got around lunchtime, I was hungry. I was very hungry. So I went down to the cafeteria and I ate a chicken sandwich from the cafeteria. I don't recommend doing that. It is no Chick-fil-A in that cafeteria. But what Jesus is talking about here is not the physical hunger that I was experiencing and then tried to satisfy with that sandwich, which, again, not a good idea. That's not the hunger that he's talking about. He's talking about the spiritual hunger. You're never going to be spiritually hungry or spiritually thirsty again when you come to him. And then if we were to continue reading on through there, let me pick up in verse 38. For I came down from heaven, not to do mine own will, but the will of him that sent me. And this is the Father's will which hath sent me, that all of which he hath given me I should lose nothing, but should raise it up again at the last day. And this is the will of him, he's talking about God here, this is the will of him that sent me, that every one which seeth the Son and believeth on him may have everlasting life, and I will raise him up at the last day. The will of God is that all who believes will be saved. And I think that's an amazing truth. There are some folks, and it makes me so angry when I hear this, but there are some folks, some very famous Bible teachers, who will teach that God has made only a certain number of people who are going to go to heaven. All right, so we got 7 billion people on the planet. I think that's an amazing fact that we have 7 billion people on the planet. But these Bible teachers will teach you that out of that 7 billion, only a certain number are the ones that are going to go to heaven. And quite honestly, I don't know what to think about that. I think that that's got to be one of the cruelest things that, I mean, because how do you go up to somebody and say, hey, there's 7 billion people on the planet. God loved the world, but, oh, sorry, you're not one of the chosen ones. You know what I mean? I don't want to get into a whole theological discussion on this because we could go on forever. But what's that? I'm sorry. Okay. Well, yes, sir.
Well, that's where they misunderstand predestination. That's basically it. We are predestined to be with the Lord when we're saved, but He does not predestine to be saved. That is a free will choice.
Yes. So I would agree with that. And Tina's giving me the look like move on, because we'll be here all night discussing this because it's happened before.
Yeah, Romans 8 gets a little confusing.
Yes, it does. Romans 8, Romans 9, that whole section right in there. But what I was saying was the will of God is that all who believes will be saved. And that's a truth that we need to hold on to. Now, it's not our responsibility to get people saved. And I think sometimes individuals get confused about that. Our responsibility is to simply let people know that salvation is available to them. That's our job, is to go out and share that good news, that gospel with them. It's then the Holy Spirit's responsibility to take care of what happens next. Our responsibility is to go out and take care of that. And then the Holy Spirit takes it from there. So that's the confusion. The children of Israel the crowd was, hey, Lord, give us some more of this bread. And so Jesus had to basically open it up to them and say, look, I'm the bread of life. If you come to me, you will receive salvation. And then the next thing that happens is you would think that after he said that, after he laid it out there for them, that they would openly receive him. But you can see part 3 is the complaint. And beginning in verse 41, it says this: the Jews, and anytime John in the Gospel of John, anytime he takes it from the crowd or something like that, and he says the Jews, he means it negatively, not in like an anti-Semitic way, but as you're going to see, what happens next is not a good thing. So anytime you see that phrase, it typically means something not good is about to happen. Verse 41 says, the Jews then murmured at him because he said, I am the bread which came down from heaven. And they said, is not this Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? How is it then that he saith, I came down from heaven? Jesus therefore answered and said unto him, murmur not among yourselves. After hearing Jesus speak, after they heard him give this little sermon, the crowd began to grumble. They began to mumble amongst themselves, like, well, who does this guy think he is? I mean, we've known this guy for 30 plus years, and now all of a sudden he's saying this stuff to us. And they grumbled for 2 reasons. The first one is that Jesus claimed to be from heaven. Jesus claimed to be from heaven. And you got to imagine, and I guess I can kind of understand where they're coming from, because let's say I've known somebody for a long time. We'll say one of my students that I taught, I've been teaching for almost 10 years. Let's say he comes up to me and says, hey, guess what? I'm from heaven. Of course, I'm going to grumble. I'm going to say, wait a second. You're not from heaven. I taught you in 4th grade. I know for a fact you're not from heaven, because remember that time you did, tell them all the bad stuff that I still remember that they do. Teachers have a mind like that, so. Right? Yeah, we remember. All right. So they grumbled because Jesus claimed to be from heaven. And then the second one is the crowd thought that Jesus was human. They didn't understand who Jesus was. They just couldn't grasp it, because you see in here that it says that, isn't this Jesus the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? Like, we know your parents. We were there when they brought you home from I was going to say from the hospital, but brought you home from Egypt because you were hanging out over there trying to make sure you didn't get killed. We were there when you came home. We were there when we went down to Jerusalem and you got left behind. We were there. We remember all of this stuff. So number one, how are you going to tell us that you're from heaven? And number two, how are you going to tell us that you're something more than human? So this is why the crowd was beginning to grumble. And it was because they weren't willing to believe. Obviously, Jesus was saying some things that probably did kind of tilt their world upside down. But it wasn't that there were things that they couldn't understand. It's things that they didn't want to understand. It was, their belief had hardened their, their unbelief had hardened their hearts. They weren't willing to understand what Jesus was saying to them, and as a result, their hearts began to harden. We kind of see that if we've been studying the book of Exodus in Sunday school, and if you remember back to Pharaoh, Moses and Aaron went in and did all these amazing things for Pharaoh to convince him that they were actually from God and that he should listen to them. And what did Pharaoh do? He refused to believe it. He hardened his heart. He saw all of these things, and he refused to believe what Moses and Aaron were saying. The crowd, the Jews as they're now called, they had seen all of these miraculous things that Jesus had done, and yet over and over they continued to demand that he give them something bigger, something better, because they did not want to believe. And as a result, their hearts began to be hardened. If you'd flip over to the back, please, we're going to take and see how this applies. And just like I was just talking about with Pharaoh, the line up there at the top is, those who reject the truth may find that their hearts hardened. What did I write down? Those who reject the truth may find that their hearts are hardened even more by God. I was listening to a pastor. I've mentioned him before. His name's Mark Dever. He's the pastor of Capitol Hill Baptist Church in Washington, D.C. And one of the things that he does is he goes around to different colleges, different college campuses. He's invited to speak there. And he goes and he gives different talks, different lectures on believing in God. Why it's, I think the one I was listening to was entitled, "Is it intellectual suicide to believe in God?" Basically, there's that belief that if you're a Christian, you're naive and you don't really believe anything. And so he gives a talk and he explains why it's not intellectual suicide to be a Christian. Well, he was sharing this story about how he was talking to some people after it, and this guy came up to him and he said, "Hey, Mark, guess what? I'm an atheist." And so Mark said, "Hey, that's great," and just kind of shook his hand, said, "Hey, thanks for coming," and just went back to who he was talking to. And the guy kept at it. Well, don't you want to debate me? Don't you want to debate me? And Mark said, "No, I really don't." And the guy said, "Why? I came here to debate you." And Pastor Mark went on to say, "Well, listen, you've already made up your mind. You're not going to believe anything that I say, and so we're basically just going to be verbally sparring back and forth, and I'm not going to change your mind, you're not going to change my mind." This kid, because he had already made up his mind, because he was already unbelieving, nothing that Pastor Mark would have said was going to change his mind. His heart had been hardened. He had continually rejected the truth, and sometimes we see that when that happens, God will harden their heart, continue that hardening. So no matter how much truth they're given, no matter miracles or anything like that, they're still not going to believe what they hear. And we see this with Jesus. Jesus spoke in parables to obscure the truth to those who continually rejected him. Jesus spoke in parables. And this story is found in Matthew 13. I'm going to try this out here, so bear with me for a second. This isn't as good as the sticky notes, and that's not what I wanted. Technology is good unless you're on the fly, right? Okay. All right, Matthew chapter 13, beginning in verse 10, if you want to flip over there, or you can listen. This is right after Jesus tells the parable about the sower who goes out and he throws the seeds, and some end up in the good ground, and some end up in the gravel, and some end up in the road, and some the bird eats. And so the disciples come to him, and they say this, beginning in verse 10. "And the disciples came and said unto him, Why speakest thou unto them in parables? He answered and said unto them, Because it is given unto you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it is not given. For whosoever hath, to him shall be given, and he shall have more abundance. But whosoever hath not, for him shall be taken always that he hath. Therefore speak I to them in parables, because they seeing see not, and hearing they hear not, neither do they understand." Jesus told these parables because he wanted those that believed to understand what he was saying. But those that were refusing to believe, those that didn't want to believe what Jesus said, he told the parables because he knew that they were going to go, hey, that's a great story, and that's all it was going to be to them. Because they had hardened their hearts, they weren't going to accept the truth. And the sad fact is, and I failed to write this verse down, but it's in 2 Thessalonians. Chad, you may know. Do you know the verse in 2 Thessalonians? I think it's in chapter 2 about... Anyway, in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, I thought I'd put it on my outline, but apparently I didn't. I wrote it in my notes and left my notes at home. But 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, in the last days, as we get closer to the return of Jesus, or we get closer, whatever the eschatology is. Yes, whatever it happens to be, unbelievers are going to be given a strong delusion. They're going to start to believe lies, things that are going to lead them away from the truth because of their unbelief. Go ahead.
Talks about the Holy Spirit, the restrainer being lifted, and basically, well, a lot of you probably might know this. There's 2 points of view that's been studied on that. It's basically departure, and one being that a lot of Christians think this is a reference to the rapture, pre-tribulation, and another one is the falling away of church folks, falling away from the true doctrine, and falling out of church, and just like you just said, adhering to foolishness and the world's way of thinking. But it's debatable. But either way you look at it, there's going to be a departure of some sort. So.
All right. Chad is our Tim LaHaye, so we can look to him anytime we have a question about that. Tim LaHaye is the guy that wrote the Left Behind books. You may not know that name. But the reason I bring this up is, this should give us a strong impetus to go out and to share our faith with others, because we certainly don't want them to end up with this happening to them, this delusion where they believe a lie, where it gets to the point that no matter how much truth they hear, no matter how much truth they see, that they're going to continually reject it. It can also give us some comfort that when we go out and we share our faith and somebody doesn't accept right then, it can give us comfort that it's not that we did something wrong. It may be that they've just continually rejected it so much that it's falling on deaf ears.